record and close it later. So welcome back, everyone. This is the thing that we have been doing now for a little bit of time, where our goal is to talk about AI that works, talk about real code, talk about things that are going to scale, and also build reliable systems for different kinds of use cases. I'm Vaibhav. I'm one of the creators of BAML. But more importantly, I've been in machine learning for about 10 years. I've worked on all sorts of systems from Face ID to predictive systems at hedge funds, all the way to augmented reality systems over at Microsoft. And unreliability is the hardest thing to deal with. So we want to talk about that in different ways. And
Yep.
Dexter,
And I'm Dex. I'm working on a tool called Human Layer, which again, we're not here to shill anything. We're just here to learn from each other and build AI that works and figure out how we can push today's models to the bleeding edge. But in the last year or so, I've talked to hundreds of founders building agents and learning what reliability means to them and what kinds of human in the loop and all kinds of asynchronous orchestration and worked really closely with Vaibhav for a long time on like what does the future of agents look like and how can you build agents where you have a really high performance ceiling and you're not locked into kind of the assumptions of various frameworks and things like that. So that's why I'm here. That's what I'm passionate about.
cool. And today's topic is about MCP. Dexter, do you want to clue them in on what we want to talk about?
Yeah, so the idea is we've done a lot of examples, and that video is one of them, and we've done a couple workshops so far about like tool calling agents in a world where you want to maintain complete control over the prompt and the control flow. Um, but I think one of the things that has people so excited about MCP is there's a little bit less, it's kind of a uniform interface for pulling additional tools into your system. And a request we've gotten from a lot of folks is basically, okay, how do I take this 12 factor agents methodology and kind of maybe get to skip some steps or accelerate my development by not having to write the tool implement. Like we're really good. What we care about is like optimizing the prompt and the structured outputs so that when you have a reasoning trace that's 100 steps long or whatever it is, the AI can still reliably select the next tool. But once that tool is selected, your code has to decide what to do with it. And that's both incredibly freeing and incredibly powerful, but also puts a little bit more of the work on you.
Exactly.
And so I had this experience building. We have a deployment bot that runs in Slack, and we use it to like basically when a branch is merged, it'll run the dev builds and stuff, and then a human can kind of at message the bot and say, "Hey, promote this to production." That involves triggering GitHub workflows and triggering promotion workflows in Vercel. And we spent way too much time trying to figure out the exact API invocations to promote a release in Vercel. And it turned out like the fastest way to do it was like go into the Chrome console and like copy the requests and then paste those into a model and have it write the code because of the point is like integrating with external systems is hard and MCP gives service providers a way to give users a kind of drop-in tool set of tools where all you have to do is add this MCP to your system, and then you can expose it to your agent as, hey, these are options of the types of JSON you're allowed to output. And then once that JSON is output, we can actually send that to the MCP server. And so the vendor, whoever's maintaining the upstream service, is providing us with a toolkit or it's like SDKs for agents, right? Where I don't have to learn how all this stuff works. I just send the tool call to the MCP server, and that's going to handle talking to the upstream system or
Exactly.
API or whatever it is.
So all that is great, but the problem is, what if we have 1,000 plus MCP tools? What if we have 50,000 MCP tools? What if we have a bazillion MCP tools? At some point, it's not going to fit in the context window. At some point, model performance is going to drop. At some point, just like we use databases to save data onto disk and don't have everything living in memory, we're going to have to build a system that can go deal with this because everything interesting happens at large scales. And if you have a company with 10 users, you can live in memory. It's just not that interesting. Probably. There are some companies with 10 users that are interesting. Um, and today I want to, but before we get into MCP, I just want to get a poll from people really quickly about what it is. I'm gonna save this as a meeting poll and I'm just gonna run this. Um, and just two questions. I just want to get a feel for where people are at about MCP. Like who uses MCP? What's people's long-term view on MCP? I just want to get the feel for where we're at. And I'm gonna try and I'll leave it on for about like 15 more seconds. So try and answer. if you can. If you're just here to sit and listen, that's totally okay as well. But we got almost everyone answering. And I'm going to share my screen just so we can share the poll results. I think I can, if I end, it will share the poll results. All right, I'm going to end. It's been 45 seconds in 3, 2, 1, done. All right. I'm going to share the results in the chat. Can you guys see the results? I assume you can. It's out of interesting. What we see is we have some folks, about 30% of people use MCP currently. 50% of people aspirationally want to do it. Surprisingly, 25% of people will never do it. And then most people seem to be bullish on MCP. A few people don't seem to like it, and some people are like, not MCP exactly. Does anyone that is in the camp of I currently ship with MCP just want to share what they do with MCP, just to give everyone else a little bit of context?
Sure. I can hop in.
Yeah.
Yeah, so for me, a lot of what I was doing, I took over as like head of engineering and didn't have a product manager. And so a lot of the work that I was doing was basically like, hey, I've got some loose assumptions of a ticket or something that needs to be done. And I'd like to put that into like linear or something like that. And so formatting like a PRD or formatting something that just quickly kind of outlines what I needed to do. So I hooked up MCPs with Claude Desktop specifically, and then would hook those in so that I could kind of just very quickly scaffold something out. So like that's something, and I've kind of looked at different ways of expanding that. Like I think MCPs are still pretty early on, so it's been a bit tricky to find a way to like scale that out. So a lot of what I've ended up shipping is like web hookups to MCPs or
Yes.
custom chat clients because I want to use it on my phone. I want to use it on the go. Like, like I can't just be always
Generally,
tied to my computer.
thanks for sharing, Ben, right?
Sure. Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, Ben. I think generally that's what I have seen for MCPs. I know very few companies. We've talked to a bunch of YC companies, and I know very, very few of them that actually use MCPs in production, except for end user things to get scale out.
Well, and
And
I think the magic of him, like if you're writing code to own the inner agent loop, MCP just becomes another layer of SDK. I think the real magic, I was talking about this on LinkedIn with a couple folks this week, and like the real magic of MCP is like if you're not writing code or you don't know how to write code, but you just want to drop a bunch of integrations into a chatbot that you already use, like Claude Desktop or Cursor or something like that, that's where it really shines.
yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. And I
I,
think, but if you're doing it like for what I've seen it struggle with is I think the problem that a lot of people have. So before we get into this, let's do a whiteboard really fast, Dexter, of exactly what is MCP, at least from our perspective, and how do we distill it down into the same systems that we've been used to. So we do this a lot where like we think of LLMs as just functions. Functions take in input parameters and they return a data type. Let's break down what an MCP is from a very core principles, and then we can go back and think about the implementation details of what the exact implementation spec of what the current proposal for what MCP is and how that ends up panning out. And we'll try and keep this fairly high level. So let me open this really fast, the Slack, and I will open the whiteboard.
I'm starting to draw it up.
Yeah. And I will screen share my whole screen. So once again, if we do see an API key, try not to copy it. All right, I think we are live. All right, join room. Cool. So MCP servers are they're responsible for two things. They expose two special APIs on top of a standard, what you could imagine as a REST service. It has one API called list tools, and it has another API called call tools. That is it. There's nothing else magical about MCP. Fundamentally, you can view it effectively as a REST API that has two special things. And like Dexter wrote, tool baked in. It kind of can be, but just to challenge that, Dexter, there's nothing that says I can't just like put like a database here where
Sure.
I load in my tools from.
It's true. Yeah. I think most implementations have kind of a static
That's
schema,
true. But I'm trying
but
to,
yeah,
yeah,
technically, every time you call this list tools endpoint, it
it
could
can be different.
change.
And every time you call tool, it could at some point return, say, a 404 on a tool not found. And that is very okay for the spec of what an MCP has. The problem that I think a lot of people run into is when they list out tools, they do the most simplistic thing. They take these tools and pass it into the LLM. And that works until it doesn't. Because at some point, if we believe MCP is the future, and I'll share my personal view on all that at the end, so I'm not biased in any way.
The idea is actually like before you send your prompt to the agent, you would spin up every MCP server in scope for that query, everything that's installed, pull all the tools out, and then say like, hey, here's the user's prompt, and here's all the tools you can call.
Exactly. That's a traditional thing out there. And then the model will pick a tool call, which is in our world that we all know is return a data model. And then we'll call that data model and then pass it back to the MCP server.
Making life live.
Awesome. So when we are doing this, the problem with this is a lot of people call that authorization and all these security things we have to deal with. Let's just ignore all of that. Let's just assume at some point we'll be able to pass in bearer tokens of various permissions authored correctly, and we'll solve all that problem. I don't want to go into that because that's just a spec design problem.
You're talking about the auth questions in the chat?
Yeah, I'm just going to ignore that for now because I think there's more interesting problems at hand. Because fundamentally, I think the first question we should ask is it useful to have a system that returns to us a list of tools? Probably. Is it useful to have something standardized that does that? Probably. Just like it's super useful to websites for websites to all agree semantically on a robots.txt file. And we all scraper companies just agree that we're not going to go scrape robots.txt. We'll scrape according to robots.txt. It's not
Or a website can expose a open API spec that says, hey, here's the methods on this API and here's how you authenticate to them.
Exactly. So another equivalent to an MCP equivalent could just be something that says every time I go to like my website /API.ai, it exposes an open API spec that describes all the AI stuff that is available to an agent.
And there was another company that was doing this. They called it like /agents.json or something.
Yeah,
and it was an
/agents.json.
alternative. I think it was almost like an alternative to MCP. And I think now they're just going all in on MCP just because that's kind of what's become the standard.
It basically is. But like fundamentally, like does this specific implementation detail where you put it on a server and everything make sense? Maybe, but probably not in the sense of like generality. Like we probably don't need to require a microservice as a baked-in design concept. But the idea that we want to list tools makes sense. The idea that we want to be able to call those tools dynamically makes sense. So let's talk about what we could do in the world of 1,000 tools. For those of you that were here for our very first episode, classification with 1,000+ categories, you might find this to be very, very similar. And for those of you that haven't, I'm going to run through it very quickly, but you should watch that full video to get the whole concept of it so we don't have to spend too much time on repeating the same thing because that video goes into much more detail. I'm going to delete the word MCP and I'm just going to say I have a list of tools because what I fundamentally have is I have a bunch of tools and I want to go from one tool or like I want to imagine each of these are a bucket of like 100 tools. What I really want to do.
Do you want to quickly just pull up the JSON file of like basically we're not using the MCP servers and we just have that like tools.json.
Why don't I show people what it looks like? Tools.json.
So this is there's an MCP registry called Smithery, and so they have thousands of MCP servers. And so what we did was we just queried the list of servers, and then for each server we pulled off all of the tools that server exposes.
Right. So now we have like I think this is like 10,000 something tools in here or something stupid. It's like an absurd amount of tools. An agent should not be able to handle this. So we're just going to talk about this. And we're going to talk about if we have these 10,000 tools all from different servers, how do we go down this? Well, we need some function. I don't know why mine is black. What is wrong with this? I don't understand opacity. Okay. We need some function that is going to take us down from 1,000 tools to let's say like whatever tools we think the model can handle. If it can handle something like, let's assume we're using GPT-4o, so we can handle 100 tools. A model is going to be pretty good at picking 100 tools. So Dexter's writing the function signature, given a user query, and given a list of tools, which we can just call it a list of tool. Yeah, exactly. We're going to return down another list of tools. That's all we need to go write out. I'm going to write one thing in there. There we go. So this is the goal for step one.
And I'll just call it, I put in query string because this is the most common in these like raggy type like retrieval things of like what was the user's query, but it's actually like whatever parameters would help our deterministic code or whatever's inside this function, which could be more non-deterministic stuff
And
down the line.
it could be a checkbox in my UI where the user is explicitly checked off Slack. It could be a checkbox where they've explicitly checked off Notion, or in addition to the string that comes into here. Right?
Yeah.
So it's about tying the system together, but fundamentally, I just need a function that says, given some query object and a list of tools, pick a smaller list of tools. And I can do this could be a random function. It doesn't matter. That's the point. I just need something that can go from a lot to a smaller amount.
Right. You could, the simplest one would just be like return tools sub, like return the first 50 tools.
Exactly. And a more complex one is we can use embeddings to go and pick these tools. And we'll talk about how that ends up looking. And then eventually what I want is, now given this query, I want to pick the right tool. And we all know how to do this as well, which is we have the model, go ahead and say, given the user query, go pick the right tool. And that's a simple prompting problem. Once we have this, calling the tool just becomes a matter of wiring up the right APIs or calling the right function along the way. So we don't have to think about this too much. And then we're basically done. And the real magic here is being able to have what we call these probes across the way, where we want to have probes in two different sections of the system. We have these probes over here that says, did my system that narrows the tool narrow to at least one of the right tools that I need? That's question number one. If it did, I'm good. I don't need to change this part of the system. Then the next question I ask is, now given this narrower set of tools, did the model pick the right set of tools? That's another question I can go ask. And for both of these systems, I just ask a simple yes/no question. Based on which one is wrong, I update that part of the system.
And do we want to just for simplicity assume that the model's only picking one tool at a time for now? I know we can support multiple, but
yeah, for now we can assume that. If we want to support multiple, remember we just use a list. You just change the system to a list, and then we kind of solve the problem automatically. So now we'll actually go write the code. Before I go into that, do people understand? Does anyone have follow-up questions on exactly what MCP is and what we need to be able to do if we have 1,000+ tools to be able to leverage that in our system? I'll pause for like 2 seconds and you guys have plenty of time to ask. This is meant to be interactive because Dexter and I talk about this stuff all the time. But if you have questions, like this is the easiest way to get a real-time answer.
Well, I have a question I'd like to ask, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I just like to hear if generally this is something we have people deciding which tool to use, or we basically want to set up LLM so that they automate it all. So it's like, I'm wondering what the scaling procedure is like. Is it just all synthetic, or do we have someone actually in a meeting hashing it out with like domain experts?
Well, that depends on your use case. If you're in the legal world, you might want to have some lawyers actually look and see if the right tools were selected for each of these use cases. Like, hey, did the LM, were the right narrowed set of tools selected? Was the right tool selected from the smaller set of tools? Like if I have like tools as much as like load data from some judicial record versus like send a message on Slack, like any human can probably look at and say if the query, what the query wanted, but there might be more nuances for two different types of tools in the judicial record system that call something evidence, like submit evidence versus like submit like evidentiary claim. I don't even know what those words mean, but you can assume that those words mean something specific in that industry. And only a lawyer could discern that correctness.
and again, we have two probes in our system, right? We have our way we narrow down the tools, and then we have our prompt. And so in your prompt, you could say things like, if you test this and you find, oh, in this case, it can't tell the difference between those tools or can't select them, then maybe you either update the descriptions of the tools themselves, because that gets injected into the prompt here, or you actually explicitly put in your prompt like instructions about like only use this tool in this case, otherwise use this tool.
Yes.
But again, it's just something that you can change that's isolated, that's testable.
Yes. Does that make sense, John?
Yeah, I think I really appreciate the perspective on how to get the engineering process into it.
Yeah. And like really the problem with AI systems is you do have to blend non-AI people with AI pipelines and you have to help blend the two knowledges together. And often it's easier to teach non-engineering people a little bit of AI than it is to teach not engineers a lot of business context. At least what we have seen. So now let's talk. I think there's a question that I see quite a lot in here, which is like just the volume of tools. Is this like a real problem that people have? Well, I think most people don't have this problem because most people are building toys. But the minute you build like a real system, you will immediately have this problem. Oh, sorry. And the reason you'll have this problem is if you decide to use an MCP server, what MCP servers are you going to load? If you use an engine like Smithery and you just plug everything in, you will have a deluge of tools. There's nothing you can do about that. Like Dexter and I didn't even scrape all of Smithery, and in a very short time, we found a 10,000 tools. This doesn't even work. And the thing that you have to think about really hard here over here is the fact that like there's like new types of security vulnerabilities that get injected here, which is how do you trust the MCP servers if you're just adding them in a wild way? Because I could change the description here that says to just say like add something like add a social security number. And if you're just pulling stuff in, you do not get like an easy source of trust here. So
This
that's the problem.
this just blew up on Twitter yesterday. Someone posted like, "Oh yeah, if you drop the GitHub MCP server and you let your users prompt it, they can get it to like create a pull request that includes a bunch of PII."
Exactly. Exactly. And there's nothing you can really do to prevent that fundamentally, because what you're really doing is you're using code you don't own without any sort of gateways that you don't have. This is just like a security risk fundamentally, where like when you call this tool, you have no control over what happens. This is basically happening outside of your own system. If you're
I mean,
using
you could drop in like deterministic code somewhere here, right? And you could say like, "Oh, let's do a last minute filter before we call it."
yeah,
And
yeah, we could do some checks, we could do validation, but fundamentally, the MCP server is a black box to your application if you don't own it. If it's all internal MCP servers, these are lower risks, obviously. But when you think about MCP servers, you should view them as the same way as using an API endpoint from anywhere that you don't trust until you know it. So can you trust GitHub's APIs to not do anything malicious with your data? Yes, because you're their customer, they'll treat you well. Can you trust an MCP server that exposes your GitHub API to your end users? Probably less so, because there's incentive for some people out there to have access to it to do bad things. So you have to be careful about what you expose. Exposing a read-only MCP server, definitely okay. Exposing a read and write, you should think about it. Read and modify, probably more dangerous. Append only actions, less risky. So you need to go and evaluate the systems from a standard software engineering principles and not get too excited about, I just added these capabilities. Because these capabilities come with an unbounded amount of risk that you're adding onto your application. And that is, I think, one thing that is way less talked about in these AI agents, because this is the risk of MCP. That said, we're here to talk about how to use MCP, not the risks of MCP. So we'll
yep.
talk about how to go do this, because any of the things that you do here doesn't have to be true with just MCP. You could have this in your own app. You could have built 50,000 tools that you trust, that your company exposes, and now you want to give your agent those capabilities. Now, many of you have probably seen me draw this diagram a few times at this point, where I always draw like, oh my God, not an A. How do I draw? I want to draw with my pencil. I always draw these weird things where I draw this curve. This curve represents a lot of software. So I'm going to draw this, how this talks about MCP and capabilities.
Sorry, what's on the x-axis here?
That's what I'm going to talk about. What MCP really does is an MCP server quickly extends your capabilities that you're able to cover with better averageness, but it drops your reliability in any one service. Because what you've done by adding MCP is you've basically taken away more control away from your control flow system. So you're not writing if statements, for loops, all these other systems around there. You're just saying, pick something, go do it. And that's like saying, I have hired 100 different contractors and I will just let them shuffle tasks around to go do it. They'll probably go do something, especially if they're pretty good. But
yeah,
the time
it's like
horizon,
classical deterministic software versus, here's a 1,000 tools and one, we call it like the God prompt or whatever. Like,
Exactly.
hey, you're an agent, you can solve every single problem for me. And this here is like a spectrum. And so,
Exactly.
yeah,
Like,
more tools is like, cool, I'm going to write less code and I'm going to hope the LM can figure it out. But again, that's what we've always found. That's what 12-factor agents is all about, is like the less deterministic you have, the less deterministic your software is. And that's kind of part of it. And there's always trade-offs there and you got to find your
yeah,
sweet spot. And so we're going to talk today is like methods of like, okay, how can we balance and how can we find a sweet spot where it's like, okay, I'm still not writing every line of code like into classic deterministic software, but I'm also not just like handing off the keys and letting the model go YOLO it.
exactly. Because like this line we have here represents classic deterministic software. It handles that one scenario really damn well and nothing else. Then we add some LLMs to it and it becomes slightly, oh, wrong side of the curve. It becomes slightly worse, but it starts to handle a lot more scenarios. And then we add a bunch of MCP, and then like on average, it might perform worse, but it handles way more scenarios than anything else that we have done beforehand, and like therefore it's better. Because we care about coverage for our unique application more than we care about adding everything else. And really, it doesn't have to be an either or situation, which is where people get stumped. It can easily just become, we will write this deterministic software for this one control path we have. We'll write an LLM workflow for this other control set of control paths. And you know what? For everything else that we're not going to cover, we're going to toss it in an MCP. And that will address everything. And we can just use an LLM to decide which of these paths we're going to send our user on based on the current journey that they're on. And that is an easy way to think about these softwares. So it's not an either or. We can really leverage all of them together along the way. That said, let's talk about tools and how we use 1,000+ tools.
Yep. And there's another good question there of like, can we label tools as critical? I'll add a link after the session. There's some new stuff in the spec where you can annotate the tools, but it doesn't get sent to the LLM. It's kind of directions to the client.
Exactly. So we'll talk about this a little bit. So let's talk about again, what is these tools? Because I tried to go write this code. And I've written as much of it as I could ahead of time because most of it's just boilerplate code and we can just walk through it. It's a lot easier rather than having to talk about it. So what I want to do is I want to open this file. I want to look at what this looks like. So what is our agent loop as the very first part of it? Our agent loop is going to be this. We are going to have a function. A function is going to take a state. And for now, I'm going to do something really dumb. I'm going to pass in our state as purely a string. And Dexter will probably like this, which is I added some other tools.
Nice.
Our prompt is going to be extremely simple, which is you are an agent with access to any number of tools. I'm going to tell it what it has to do. It's going to answer with one of those tools and help that user by picking an action from the following. This is bad, or the following. And then I'm just going to write the users. I'm just going to dump the state as a part of the user message along the way. Now, what are these tools that I have exposed to the model? I have two specific tools that I'm going to like hard code into my system because I know MCP servers are just not good enough. The first one I'm going to add is I want to have the user have two different types of messages that I have. One is a request clarification, where I literally just I want to show the user a different type of message that says, I need your help. And I might render that in the UI separately than a respond to user message because it's just slightly different UIs and I just want to have that differentiated. And then the actual message. So that's my human message. But then I have a second type of tool that is all my actions. And I'm just going to mark these dynamically defined. So I will not define them at runtime. I will only define them. I will not define them at compile time. All these actions are only known at runtime.
So this is the difference between if you want to, I'm just going to send you one other file, the kind of like calculator tools that we brought
Oh yeah,
into
I have
the
that right
12.
here.
Oh yeah, okay, cool.
What is it called?
Tool calculator. So like this would be like hard code defining your tools
Exactly.
and then passing those to the model. And so you could do these all by hand, but the whole point is in MCP, we're going to do this dynamically. We're going to fetch something at runtime, and then we're going to feed those into the model as
And you can always
potential
do a
options.
blend as well. Like you can say, hey, what we'll do is we'll actually send, just like we have like some statically defined tools, like human messages. We can also just add calculator tools here. Let's give it the calculator tools while we're at it. Like we don't have to, we live in this hybrid world where some tools are going to be defined dynamically and some tools are going to be defined statically. And the static tools are in general going to have more reliability, more systematic guarantees because we know about them. And the dynamic tools will have less guarantees and less reliability because we won't really tie it to our UI or end process because we can't by definition. And then we really just have this function. So I want to talk about how we'll end up using this function. So generally I will try and write this code by hand. So I'll just go around it about and go do that. So what we're going to have is we're going to have a function that's going to do something. Now, in order to load our tools from dynamically, you have to use something that can go represent the tools. So we have a thing called type builder that does that. And for now, let's just assume that this will work. I'll talk about how this does.
Yeah, I might even just put a to do here, like, hey, look, this is where you would like dynamically launch your MCP server, call the list tools, and kind of compact it into your list of things
Exactly.
that you're going to parse. But we did that ahead of time, and just
For
dropped it
just
in a
time,
JSON file.
time reasons. Exactly. And your company might do that too. You might just cache the tools list thing so you don't have to call it every single time you go there. Because that file, like we said, could be huge. Like getting 10,000 tools could easily be, I don't know how big this file is, but like we can just see. Inspect. Actually, I think it tells me. Does it tell me?
It's 300,000 lines.
Um, it is it's like 11 megabytes of data. And that may not matter, but there's a point at which like the network does matter. And I don't want to send that to my client on server all the time. I just want to cache it around. So you as a developer might also make that choice at some point. Then what I have is I'm going to get these tools. I'm going to send it to my tool options. Then at runtime, I'm going to say my actions data model, I'm going to add a property to it called tools. And I'm going to add my tools into this property. Now, how did I go from 1,000 tools to a smaller amount? Well, in this case, I did the dumbest possible thing, which is I just picked the first 50 tools. I did nothing clever at all.
Do you want to pull that into like a narrow tools function just to
Yeah.
be kind of map it back to the whiteboard?
Narrow tools, and like, what is the type of this thing? This is going to be a list of field types. Okay, I have to go import things. This is probably the only reason I did not do this. Okay. So I'm just gonna go, for now, I'm gonna go do this. I'll pass in the query, stir, and pass that in. And what I will do here is this instead of this will just be a narrow tools, and I will pass in a query, which is empty stir.
But basically the query would be the input to your do something method, right?
Exactly. And then specifically what I'm saying is, hey, in this scenario, the tool options is going to be a union of any of these tools that I passed in to this thing. So given a list of 100 tools, I'm allowed to pick any one of those. Now I might say I want to pick multiple of those, and I can just do a dot list or something. And now I'm allowed to pick a list of these unions, but I don't have to pick all of them, and it's up to me to decide.
So union is basically you're going to ask the model pick one structured object, and to be valid, it has to be one of the 50 types in this union, basically.
Exactly.
Cool.
And then what I'm going to go do is I'm going to do the next part, which is I'm going to write my chat loop. And many of you have probably seen this chat loop before. It's very straightforward. We just put a while loop true. We have a chat object that represents a current state. And we're going to just run this and say, I'm going to pick the action based on whatever they use that LLM function. The action will return one of my static tools, which is a human message type. And if it is a human message type, I'll print out the message to the user. I'll add it to my chat thread that I have going on over here. And then I'll take the user's message, append it on, and I'll run it again.
And this is a really subtle thing going on here. I think most people are used to seeing a big JSON structure here with role user and all that stuff. This is actually a great illustration of a concept we talk a lot about in 12-factor agents, which is like you can tell the model what's happened so far however you want. You do not have to use the standard OpenAI JSON messages format. You could just put the whole thing in a system message or put the whole thing in a user message, and let it work from there. And if you look at how our prompt works, it's just going to put all that in. Uh, I know models are like specifically tuned on like user versus assistant, and you could still implement that, but
It's up to you.
I think this is worth calling out because it's subtle.
Exactly. So you can see over TypeScript or Riot. I'll do TypeScript next time. It's pretty much the same thing. You can send all this stuff to ChatGPT and I'll convert it to TypeScript for you.
I was on a stand-up
Um,
today, and my engineers keep asking to rewrite all our Python and TypeScript. So
that is the
I feel
correct
you,
choice.
Andrew.
I apologize that I have to do the sin of using Python
Look,
because
we're
sadly,
equal opportunity builders here. I think there's plenty of reason to use Python and TypeScript. I honestly think that if you're going to build things in AI, you should just get good at both.
or just learn BAML and doesn't. Anyway, I'm joking. I'll stop. But I think though, when I go down this road, is like I've added this to my tool, and for the other action, what I'll do is the minute I get an MCP tool, in this case, I'm breaking, but I don't have to break. I could call the MCP server and then continue onwards.
I want to pause you one more time. Your battery's about to die.
Oh shoot. Yes. Um,
Shouts out to Remo, or sorry, shouts out to Shia.
I'll be
Thank you for
back
calling
in
that out.
2 seconds.
Any questions so far? Does this all make sense? I mean, shouts out to Remo for saying Python and TypeScript, but yeah, go ahead, Kushal.
Yeah, I was just wondering, like, when you have like multiple functions that are being run within the MCP server, have you encountered a situation where you have to figure out the right order for the functions to run, and how does the LLM do that? In some cases, the order might be important.
Yeah.
Um,
How to deal with
yeah, I mean, I think the
it.
LLM is always going to return tools as a list. And so you could call it in the order that the LLM picked. You can also just constrain the LLM. This prompt that we have here is constraining it to only do one action at a time. But you could just turn this to a list type and then it could return multiple. I've seen some interesting stuff where people have it calls the human message tool and the other tool, and that can be used like depending on how you prompt it. Like the prompt is like you have total control over how you ask the model to talk. And so you could say always output a human message and the tool you're calling, and then we show it to the user while the tool's being called. But yeah, for ordering, Vaibhav, have you ever seen anything where like a model
Yeah.
picks multiple tools and you have to decide what order to call them in?
Well, that I'm gonna do something silly here, but it's like, look, if you care about ordering, then you just
Yeah, but I'm talking more like in a situation where I don't know, it's just imagine like a subject matter expert who doesn't really know much coding and stuff, and they're just using this tool, and the tool is like asking for like a bunch of websites that have to like go through different things. So there might be a right flow to do those operations in,
that's
and it
your
might
responsibility as an app developer to determine your use case. If you're doing a bunch of stuff in parallel, you're doing that as an optimization because you can
got
always just have the LM do one thing at a time and go do that. What you've said is, I want to go do things in parallel.
yeah.
But just like if you're doing, you have to deal with race conditions, data races, and atomic and non-atomic variables if you're writing multi-threading code. That's now your job as an app developer to take on that burden away from your users. And how do
Got
you
it.
do that? You just do this. You're going to say this depends on these tools as a part of your
Mhm.
order tools.
Yeah,
And
or you could even
now,
take it out of the LLM's hands and you could have deterministic code that says like, hey, for if there are web search tools in the payload, run all of those in parallel before running any of the other tools. But at the end
exactly.
of the day, the model calls seven tools. The model is asking you, go do all these things and then send me back the context window once you've done all the things. So you basically get to decide and optimize all of that.
Yeah.
Yes. Does that make sense? Oh, hello?
The first step is you have to find flights that work, and only after you find the flights do you want those days, right? But if you end up booking the hotels first, but your flights are, the days are not aligned, that's kind of a situation you don't want. So how can we like, have the agent go through those like steps sequentially is what I'm trying to figure out.
That's as a part of your data model. Your data model needs to represent the sequentialness of
Okay.
control flow if you want to go do that. Or you can just embed that as baked in knowledge, like Dexter says, which is like if you get any
Yeah.
search request, regardless of what order the LLM spits out in, like let me change this really fast just to make it more clear. Let's say I return an array of tools right over here. I've now changed my code to yeah, exactly. Exactly. Ajay said it really well. So let's say over here I have an array. I now have a list of actions and human messages that come out. It is now up to me to say that this thing is now going to be, what is this? Oh, shoot, I disabled the generator. Sorry. No. Sorry, I'm running a dev version and I need to stop doing things. All right, cool. This thing now is going to be a list of actions. And what I want to do here is I'm going to say for action and action, go do the same thing that I was saying before.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
But now I don't have to do this. I could first say like actions equal action, like sort actions. And I can say I can sort this now in this way. Instance. And I can say all human messages must be processed first before any other tool that comes out from the model.
Okay. Cool. Thank you.
Right. So I can find this bridge and it's up if this is important to my application security development, I can go do this. But this is really, really important that as a developer, we remember what is something that we can do versus something that versus something that a model has to go do. And this doesn't have to be a sort. I could even filter and I could remove or I could modify actions. I could say, hey, if one of the actions is going to be like read bank transaction, insert another action before that that says show something to a user that I'm going to read your bank statement and like send a human message to confirm before I go do this.
Yes,
Yeah.
and Joe started typing something that I think is really, really clear and like really important is like the first time I tried to build a tool calling agent for me for something that I really wanted, it was like, and I think I said this last week too, is like I was building, I had a make file to build my project, and it was like Docker build and run tests and all this stuff. And I started with just like, here's the make file, go build the project. And I gave it access to call bash functions. And then I kept doing things out of order. And then I kept making the prompt bigger and more complicated. And I was like, first do this, then do this, then do this, then do this. And I think one of the points we're going to make on this show all the time is that there are certain things that models are really, really good at. But like if you already know the order, I spent like 2 hours trying to hack on this thing and get the prompt perfect. If you already know what the right order is,
Just
you
do
could have
it.
just written those 5 make commands in a bash script. You don't need a model to do that.
Exactly. So now I'm going to go run this code just to give people a little bit of an idea of what I've been doing over here. I'm going to stop screen sharing for half a second while I load my API keys. Port. Okay. And I'm going to be back to screen sharing. Okay. So I've loaded my API keys and hopefully no one will see them. But if you do, we'll find out.
I have a couple copies of them if anyone wants them.
Yeah. So let's go run this thing. And I'm going to do a really, really simple thing. I'm just going to call it run, do something, and we'll just see what happens. UV run tools. Tool. Oh, I'm not in the right folder. That's why. CD 2025 10 CD bonus. What is this workshop bonus? Clear. Okay. UV run tools.py. So I'm going to go send it a bunch of messages and this is going to run some stuff. And the first thing I want to show people is the message I send is get pages 1 through 3 from the database. So I want to spend some time just reading over this prompt so we can see what happens. It's the same prompt that we had before. I'm going to move this over here so we can go see this, which is saying the following. You are an agent with access to any number of tools, answer in JSON with one of these schemas. And I literally just list out the tools field like I did over here I'm going to show what this parse tools does. This thing is going to add a tools, whoops. This thing adds a tool field, which is over here into my action data model, and it lists out all the tool options that I have. So my tool name is going to be whatever execute command or something. It has the command, timeout, blah, 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 one read output, and a bunch of other tools. Where are these coming from? What I did over here is I simply read the JSON schema and I just converted to a data model of my choice. This is the other point. You don't have to use Open API specs. You don't have to tie yourself down to it. You might find that, hey, the word tool name is fine, but actually it's going to be way better to not call it tool name. I just want to alias it to, I want to alias this to like a function name.
Oh, function. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So we can change this, and now the LLM will basically now call it function name. And that's the point. Don't tie yourself down because different models will have different behaviors, and you need to be able to change this on the fly in a really easy way. You likely want it to be the same thing all the way down, no matter what. Now, I did something very unique, which is this is what I call it for the LLM. What I actually call it in my code is like BAML tool name with dollar signs because I want to be able to find that key and not accidentally pollute it from all the other JSON fields that people might have.
Sorry, I didn't quite catch the usage of BAML tool key. Can you?
Yeah, let me describe that again. Let me call a tool really fast. Let's just call like we'll do this. Add a to do actually. So we see over here, add a to do over here. So actually add a to do to Jot to send Dexter the database ID. And I'll say add a to do. Let's just see what this happens. I have no idea. I need it. Oh, and you can see what it actually did. It actually said right over here, detailed like due date, priority, and additional description. Why? Because due date, priority, and additional description. It actually pulled it out from here. I need it by tomorrow, May 28th. And it's high prio.
Okay, so the model didn't select the tool, but it knew what the tool needed because it was in the prompt.
Exactly. So it used the request human clarification tool, and then it returned this tool back for me. And why is BAML tool name here? Well, that's because this is a special thing that I added that I wanted. So for the sake of the prompt, I don't want to call it something special. I just want to call it function name because it's easier for the model. For the sake of my code, I do want to call it something special because who knows what MCP server is doing what under the hood. And maybe they have another property called function name. And I don't want to deal with that. So what I do is I just say for the LLM, we'll call it function name. But in my code base, I'll call it BAML tool name. So I can find it very easily and handle it in a more deterministic way. Does that make sense, Dexter?
Yeah, I got it. I mean, you're still passing it into the prompt as function name.
Yes.
So I don't see how it quite solves that problem, but I get the concept you're trying to get across, which is like you want to have kind of special reserved fields or something.
Exactly. And like if I want to call, if I accidentally, even if I call this if I call this in the model is going to get confused. Like we know this is going to hurt the model's performance. So I'm going to do the thing that's going to help the model the most and just alias that in field to whatever I want to call it.
And then when basically, and the idea is like we haven't implemented the part of the loop that actually goes and calls that tool yet. And we're probably not even going to do that today. Maybe if we have time at the end.
Well,
But
that actually
the
ends up
idea
being
here
really
is how do
easy
we narrow
because
Sorry?
what I do here is I say tool equals action dot model extra tools. Oh, and this is okay, cool. Tool. This is going to be in any type. It always will be in any type. There's nothing you can really do about that. If you
Because
want,
you're doing it dynamically at runtime.
exactly, because we can't really help that. So we'll just type it as a dict of stir to any. And now we'll go do this. And now we can say like tool name equals tool.pop. What did I call that field? Tool name key. And now I have the name of the tool, and then args are just the rest of it. And I can even say print.
Yeah, let's see that. Let's run it. Yeah, cool.
All. Let's run this. And
You're gonna have to go get your prompt again. If you just copy the list of user messages out of the top, you can do it. Oh, wait. Oh, wait, scroll back down. Here. Yeah, get that.
and that's the same thing, which makes sense because LLMs aren't fully where did it go? Scrolling is hard. I should have made this a test case. And the other thing I noticed is that I'm actually not injecting the AI messages in here. So it sounds like there's a bug somewhere in my code. Oh, yeah, right over here. I only print it out.
Yeah, I think Cursor deleted your AI message.
That makes sense.
But
Now
honestly,
it says right over here, I'd like to call
yeah,
the tool Notion AI, Notion API MCP tool, and I just send these args in. And now I can just pass it into the MCP parameter, get the response, add it to my chat object, and in whatever form I want, it doesn't really matter, and then continue on with my loop. I'm gonna pause here and just say, do people have questions?
I think the biggest question that was in there was that Joe was asking was like, okay, how do we do the embeddings and the narrowing in a like smart, sophisticated way?
Yeah.
And I think that's actually more interesting than actually going and calling the tool. Although I think probably we can publish an example afterwards of like, hey, we brought in the Python MCP client and actually ripped it.
Like, yeah, we can just call the tool or something. We can go do that too. I think you're right. I think this is probably the most interesting part. What I would do if I were here is I actually wouldn't do this in this way. The thing we've done here is not bad, but really what I would do is I'd say narrow tools, list of tools, def load tools. And what I'm going to do is like tool file path, and then what I'm going to return is going to be a type builder object. I'm just going to call this right over here every single time. So I'm going to parse the tools. I'm going to parse tool path. I'm going to return this. And specifically what I'm going to have is I'm going to pass in a query into here. And given a query, I'm going to narrow the tool. So everything should look almost the same. Except we're going to do this. And now we basically are going to load the tools on every single chat all the time and pass that object in. Now we don't
Yeah,
have
let's see how that works. You think that's going to work well?
Well, in this case, no, because I'm still returning narrow tools is still returning the 50 first tools.
Okay.
Like there's nothing that's happening over here. But like we could use embeddings to solve the right tools. The problem again that I think a lot of people run into is the problem that we run into when we do classification. Most people make the mistake of saying that, hey, I'm going to use this description as the thing that I pass into LLM and also the thing for embeddings. That is a mistake. Just like in classification, remember what we did and when we did a classification doc, and I'll pull up that doc again. Hello.
There's the screenshots are in the repo.
Exactly. That's all. I'll just pull it up on here. Because I think that's going to be a better way to just look at it. And we look at classification and we look at this. Like we did not send the same description to the prompt as we did to the embedding system. And we should not do that because different models have different behaviors. So the fact of being able to go ahead and we can say that, hey, the description for this category for the embedding text is different than the description that goes into LLM to help select the right category is also true for LLMs. The description that I use here for this tool is likely not the best description for actually passing it into an embedding model. Maybe I take the whole thing over here and I send that to an embedding model. Maybe I send the entire server to an embedding model all at once and all the tools under one server. it really is up to me of how I decide that. And I shouldn't be tied down to go doing that in some other way. So even like this thing that we wrote over here of like picking the right tools, this doesn't actually have to be as simple as like I have a list of tools already, go select that. I could say I have a list of servers which contains a list of tools and now go narrow from there. And that could both narrow the servers down and the tools down. So it's important that I maintain that control at all times of how I go do this. And one sophisticated manner is chuck everything in embedding, use the description of the tool to decide what you do. But what ends up happening in practice is like when I read this, this doesn't actually help me if I use the description alone. You could easily imagine having this. This is the same description for GitHub and Bitbucket. That is useless to me as a developer. You might have that, hey, I know that you are logged in as a company you have connected to my organization, you have connected GitHub. Well, then it doesn't matter what Bitbucket descriptions are. I just use a Boolean switch that isn't anything fancy to just say I only enable GitHub servers. And I don't enable Bitbucket servers. And you'll hear Dexter and I say the same thing over and over again, which is like, there is no one-shot magic trick. And I think that's what people, when we saw the poll today, why everyone was so optimistic about MCP, is it feels like that magic bullet, but it's not. You're just adding more software. And like whether you want to use an API or not is up to you. Like we use REST APIs all the time. We don't all reinvent GitHub. We just use it and it's useful. So like
Yeah.
it might make sense to use someone else's agentic system. But how you use it, how you plug it in is very important to your actual application. And like that is application specific.
Cool. Are we going to do it?
I mean, I can write the embedding thing. And what I will do is I will just go to our previous code and I will copy and paste it because we already have it and I'll have to reinvent the wheel. But we had this thing up here, which is narrow down category. It's literally going to be the exact same code. Where did it go?
Yeah, and I think while you're doing that, like the main lesson here is right. You can do this in 100 different ways. You can use embeddings. You can do this like I feel like I don't know the word for it. It's not RAG, but it's like basically like passing chunks of data into an LLM and having it like decide whether any of them are relevant. Passing lists of tools, and you can have a really small LLM decide, okay, cool, these 6 tools are relevant and the rest of them are not. And you might get 0 relevant tools on most of your queries. But again, it's a smaller, more focused prompt.
Yeah, let me go change this code really fast because in order to go do this, what I actually have to do is right now what I'm returning here for every tool is I'm returning the name of the server and the tool and then the actual type that is associated with it. What I actually need to return now is changed. What I need to return now is going to be the entire tool object and the type of the tool. It's no longer a simple object because I need that object to be able to do the embedding.
To do the embeddings. Yep.
Exactly. So now what I'm going to have here is I'm going to load the tools. Sorry. I'll load the tools. The tools will be, did I change the type? Tool. Cool. I'm going to load the tools. Tools will be a type of tools and values. This will be tool types. And now I have to go down and write this code. I'll go do this and this one. Narrow down my tools. So I will have a bunch of tools for every tool. What I will do is I will find the embedding of every.
So you're going to use the raw JSON from the MCP server to generate the embedding text.
Exactly. Is this correct? I have to do it.
You need to grab the embed function.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to do JSON.dumps. I'm just literally going to dump that into my category.
Mm-hmm.
And I won't think too hard about it.
And we're pulling some language from the last one of we're using in this one, it's called categories. In this one, in the tools one, it should probably be called tool, but
yeah, we'll deal with that in a second. I'm going to rename this to field type. I got to import NumPy. And most of this should just work.
Oh
Cool.
man, look at Otto doing our homework for us, building the summary of key takeaways for us. Yes, define a prompt with an action that's dynamic. List out all your tools.
Matches, like we'll increase the matches to like, I don't know, like 100. Uh, and now this is going to go return this. And now we just use this and we return a union and we're basically done. And that should basically just work. Text. Okay, blah, blah, blah. I don't need that anymore. Let's run this sucker. This might take a while because I'm going to run embeddings on like 10,000 tools. So we'll just see what it does. And I'm not running any of it in parallel because I didn't do it in async, which I probably should, but that's okay. Actually,
Get back to multiprocessing, dude.
OpenAI dot async OpenAI. Okay, cool. I want to go do this. Does input actually expect a list of ints? I don't know how that's going to work if I send it multiple, so let's not try that. And then do this in parallel. How do I do this in
Async IO dot gather.
oh
It's
wait,
like async IO dot run, async IO dot gather.
I am a little stickler for doing this, so
Oh, I see.
I will likely wait. Embedding equals.
And then if you wanted to keep this as synchronous, okay. Thanks, Deborah.
Async. Okay, cool. Is this working? Oh, and then I have the embeddings spot. Cool. And then I just wait on these, I guess. I don't actually. I'm certain that this will get fixed at some point. Wait. Okay. Okay, I think this will run.
You got to do async IO dot run here, or make it async.
Yeah, and then I will have to do async. We'll do this. And this is doing something incredibly dumb where I'm going to call the embed on every single call to this. So I have no idea what this is going to do. UV add OpenAI. UV add NumPy. And all this seems to be a little bit, I think, repetitive from last time, but that's because like the reason I didn't describe this is you can go learn about the nuances there very easily. But the whole point of this is that you don't have to do everything. You can just use the same principles and build them up to build more complex systems over time.
Yeah, so you could use embeddings to narrow this down.
What am I
You could
actually
use an
embedding?
LLM to
I'm
narrow
literally
this
just
down.
Oh, sorry, Dexter, what are you saying?
Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's a little lag. Yeah, you can use embeddings to narrow this down. You can use an LLM to narrow this down. You could use some deterministic code that does, as someone
Exactly.
mentioned, having full text search.
And I'm doing something really, really dumb over here, which is I'm basically just embedding each JSON blob completely independently. So I'm
Yeah.
not even
So
embedding the
you
description.
probably would want to do like the name and the description or something, right?
Maybe, I don't know. I really don't know. And the thing is, like for every tool, you probably want a special way to embed it. And that thing is unique to that tool. And in fact,
I mean, so yeah, and this is the point. I mean, we'll just keep saying every week is like the idea is not to get this perfect in an hour. The idea is to build a system that gives us lots of points that we can both test, that we can mock, that we can probe, that we can tweak, so that we can optimize each part of the pipeline to the point where we can build a system that, as always, gets the most out of today's LLMs. And this is sort of the approach that we're seeing both large enterprises and really hot startups are using all over the place is like the 100 MCP tools single prompt or 1,000 MCP tools single prompt. One that one just breaks down. And like you could just use less tools to start, but eventually you'll actually want to be able to have an agent that can do lots and lots of things.
Exactly.
And this is kind of step one in doing that.
Yeah. And more importantly, like the fact of the matter is the actual embedding text that you're going to go embed is likely unique to your unique problem. The way you embed that tool is specific to you. And any description you use is likely going to be specific to you. So even if you have an
I mean, you could
MCP,
even pre-process and have an LLM read the JSON and spit out a really wordy description that then we go use to make embeddings out of.
yeah, and then I think you asked the question, Remo, I was like, could you not fine tune a small classification model? I mean, you could. That becomes another way to build the same function that we just built over here, which is narrow categories. You could build a classifier that does that. You could build a random algorithm. It's based on your use case and how well you understand your problem.
And
What
how well you understand your problem, going back to the evals episode that we did, is like you should have a test suite that puts 100 things in here and gives you a score out, because until you know that a certain approach is better or worse than another one, you're just kind of shooting in the dark.
exactly? And then like one of the ways that you see us doing this right now is we're just like, I hard coded a simple prompt into my system. I didn't really think about it. And then I put then I just put a while true loop and I just kept running and typing just to see if it behaved correctly. Why did I add this human human message tool? Well, at this point, I've built a lot of agents, so I kind of just know that likely the human message is not going to have enough clarification. So I generally will build this in since I'm building a CLI interactive system anyway. So for a CLI interactive system, I'm just going to default to this as a good practice that I've learned. But that just
Okay,
experience of building these systems.
3 minutes left. Any last takeaways here before we jump to questions?
I'm hoping this will run eventually. I forgot to build the progress bar. This is why I add the progress bar. It's so nice.
TQDM?
Yeah. But no, really, the last takeaway is just like MCP isn't that hard. It's just an API that does list a bunch of tools and lets you call that tool. We already have a bunch of other ways to go do that as well. So you don't have to tie yourself to MCP. Calling an MCP server with 1,000+ tools is just a matter of being able to narrow down to a small amount of tools correctly. The rest of this code is easy software, and you can go look at exactly how we did this. Like how we converted that to a type spec is really easy. You're just defining OpenAPI specs and converting it to OpenAPI says Boolean, you make that a Boolean. OpenAPI says string, you make that a string. OpenAPI says these three enums, you make that an enum. It's a pretty straightforward data model conversion. So that part isn't really interesting. The only part that is interesting is giving it a tool name that then you can go call.
Love it. And to recap, based on what Otto said, I think is really good, is like basically define a prompt with a dynamic action, call list tools, optionally narrow those tools, inject those, parse into structured data and inject them into the BAML prompt at runtime, and then handle the LLM response however you would in any other agentic system.
Exactly. That's it. It's not that hard. It's very few lines of code. The lines of code get messy when you start doing fancy things like narrowing down your categories using embeddings.
Awesome. We had a lot of great questions during the show. Any other questions, either drop them in the chat or put a hand up or just come off mute.
What's been the best performing embedding model? And what's been the best performing embedding you've made so far? How do you implement it? I don't think there is a best performing. I think it's very use case specific, but in general, I think it's just like, as long as you can control the text of the embedding, it becomes really easy to tweak it when it picks the wrong thing. So like, I think that's the most important insight is like, look, if the embedding picked the wrong tool, then there's no way the LLM can pick the right one because it's not even in your input. So you just have to be able, and the beauty of this system is if you have to tweak your prompt to change your embedding, you're stuck. Like that's a bad place to be. What you really want to be able to do is you want to be able to tweak your embeddings completely orthogonal to changing your prompts. If they're the one and the same, then changing one impacts the other. You want a separation of concerns as much as possible. Is that Dexter? What about you? Have you seen models that are strictly better or worse?
I've seen faster embeddings.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah.
Embeddings really just aren't that cool, but like there are ways now where you can make them fast at least.
Yeah. I think the model is the least important part of it. The most interesting part is the content that you're trying to do things with. And that's what I would focus on, given how good these models have gotten already.
Yeah, I agree. I think the lever you want to try tweak, like it's always like do the easiest thing first. Like if you can get to the performance grade that you need by changing the text that goes into the embedding, then why on earth would you go fine tune an embedding model
Yeah,
or try to use some
exactly.
fancy one or
Exactly.
something like that?
And to that point, if you can't do that level of accuracy, then you should go fine tune an embedding model, but try the easiest thing first.
Yep. And honestly, I would say even like try 1,000 MCP tools in your prompt first and like see
Yeah,
if
oh
that
yeah, why
works.
even filter? Like who knows?
Like
Maybe O3 will just do it, and you don't. Your use case is not specific to like cost or latency in any way.
went up to 70%, great, then that was a good change and that was worth it. But if you had the embedding filtering and it goes up by 0.01%, you can even say like, is it really worth the extra code and the time from our team, or do we need to take a step back and do a different approach?
Yeah. Tim asked a great question. How long does it take to create a symbol embedding? I think it's just network dependencies, sadly. So like I would just expect anything will take anywhere from like 50 milliseconds, probably the fastest you can do. And like a second is probably the worst case outcome. What I would do is, because embedding should be cheap, is I would just deploy a small embedding model into your own VPC and just call it a day. Use like Bedrock or something else to go host it, Azure, whatever you want. And that's probably the best bang for the buck. Because as we're seeing here, processing of 10,000 embeddings does take a while. It's taking a long time for this to run, and I can't really do anything about that. I do have to let it run. Other questions from anyone? Can I show the
Can you show
call?
the call for narrow down categories again?
Yeah. It's really right here. What I'm doing is my
No, I
system.
think he's like, where are you calling it?
Oh, right here. I'm just saying it's like the union of the tool options are the unions of all the tools narrowed down to some amount. And we'll post all this code online. So like you'll get access to it. We'll send the Git repo and everything. So you'll be able to run this yourself. I'll probably disable the embedding thing, or maybe what I'll do is I'll just save the embeddings to disk so you don't have to recompute it, unless you change the raw string.
Cool. Or you could just test this with a slice, right? You know, go edit the JSON file or just slice
Yeah,
out the
maybe I
first
should do
50 and
that.
test this.
Maybe I will do that. Because I suspect that's what's happening right now.
Oh, he gave up.
I have no idea how far in I got.
There's 50 cents of OpenAI credits down the drain.
Okay, this might be faster, doing 1,000 network calls. I realized 10,000 was probably too ambitious. I'm gonna do less. I'm gonna do 100. And I'm gonna only select the top like 10 matches. This will likely be a lot faster. And really what I should have done is hosted a local embedding model and just run that. And now you can see exactly what happened. So I said what, and this is kind of cool. I said database stuff and it started building Superbase into my tool
Cool.
embedding system, right? And actually it said Notion API get page, which is probably right. It picked the Superbase MCP server, restore page, database, create a new database, archive page, and everything else. You can see that some of these are totally wrong. But we can go do this. And it actually asked me a really useful question. Yes, but I want you to navigate the browser to then find the database ID. And now hopefully it'll come up with browser use in the prompt when it does this. And that's exactly what
Oh,
it
it
did,
just picked one. Yep.
right? Not only did it do that, it actually listed out and picked browser base as a thing.
Can we see the list of tools that made it in, like the top 10, top K
Yeah.
or whatever? Yeah, there you go.
And it was able to go pick that through because I'm only passing the last message and it basically just works. I think that's the whole point of these systems. But if they didn't work, then what I would do is I'd likely have to somehow modify the object that I'm embedding in some way so the right thing did get selected. That was I'm glad I ran that with a shorter tool because then we actually got to see it working end to end. I think that was a great call.
Sick.
But the principles are all the same.
Cool. All right, folks. Thanks so much for coming by.
Thanks for coming, everyone. We'll see you guys
Next week, human in the loop. We're gonna do async. We're gonna do
I'm
autonomous
excited
agents. We're
about that
gonna
one.
do
I think people have been
clarifying
asking
with the
about this
human.
for a while. I'm really excited to show some human in the loop code.
So awesome. Thanks,
All right.
everyone.
Bye, folks.
Good luck.
Good luck.